All right, so we're actually reading today in Genesis to keep going with our Galatians study. The reason we're in Genesis, and we're going to be in Genesis 19, is because in Galatians they're pointing out that they're trying to follow the law, and he points out to them, well, do you know the law? So why don't we go back and see where everything started and where everything developed from and how this stuff exists. So, of course, if we don't know that story and where it is developed and where it exists, how can we study it and see what he's trying to say with how he's responding to everybody? So, and of course, we're recording, so if anybody needs to talk about anything privately, we can just pause the recording and go right back to it as we go. So, so we were at the point where Lot was trying to get the people not to attack the strangers that came to town, and he tried to hand off his children, his 2 daughters. And I had somebody ask me this week how Lot is able to be in this town of rapists. We pointed out last week that it's 100% male populace of rapists. So it says all the males, young and old, medium age, came out to rape these 2 strangers. So how does Lot even live there? How is he able to live there? So, and what's funny is that actually ties in with what we were going to go to this week, which we could have read in chronological order, but I thought it was more fitting to go to it straight from this anyway. So we're in 19, and we just got to the point where they were moving forward to put pressure. So it was verse 9, and it says, "Get out of our way," they replied, and they said, "This fellow came here as an alien, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. And at that point, but the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. All right. So Lot was still out there. He was still trying to stop them. And they were not overcoming him yet. They were bringing pressure. So is he Superman, or why is that possible? Well, if we go back and we look at Genesis 14, we'll see why Lot is able to live there and what happens with him. So go ahead, Doug, and read there at 14. And I'm giving you this horrible slew of names.
Awesome. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylonia, King Arioch of Elasar, King Kedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goim fought against King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemeber of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also called Zor. This second group of kings joined forces in Siddim Valley, that is the valley of the Dead Sea. For 12 years they had been subject to King Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled against him. 1 year later, Kedorlaomer and his allies arrived and defeated the Rephaites at Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zusites at Ham, the Ermites at Shavakiratham.
I should have given this to James because he hasn't been here.
And the Horites at Mount Seir, as far as El Paran at the edge of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, now called Kadesh, and conquered all the territory of the Amalekites and also the Amorites living in Hazazon Tamar. Then the rebel kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, also called Zor, prepared for battle in the valley of the Dead Sea. They fought against King Kedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goim, King Amraphel of Babylonia, and King Arioch of Elasar. 4 kings against 5.
Okay, so we got some armies here. We got a major, big group of battles going on, and giant superpowers of the time fighting. It's not the little skirmish down the block. It's pointing out plainly how big these groups are. Okay, so keep going there, Doug.
As it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. And as the army of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, while the rest escaped into the mountains. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war and the food supplies. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. But one of Lot's men escaped and reported everything to Abram the Hebrew, who was living near the oak grove, belonging to Mamre the Amorite. Mamre and his relatives Eshcol and Aner were Abram's allies. When Abram heard that his nephew Lot had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men who had been born into his household. Then he pursued Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them at Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram recovered all the goods that had been taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives.
Okay, so with 318 guys, Abram, who not had any problem with any of these people, came in, rescued Sodom and Gomorrah with Lot. Abram had his special forces dudes go in and rescued these armies of people. It's amazing, right? And then we go down to, and I like to point out that the next king that they talk about wasn't part of any of these battles. I wonder why. Nobody's messing with him. You have tons of armies of different people, and nobody's messing with this next king. So we go down to that next part. So go ahead.
After Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem,
Which is also Jerusalem. Go ahead.
And a priest of God Most High brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give back my people who were captured, but you may keep for yourself all the goods you have recovered." Abram replied to the king of Sodom, "I solemnly swear to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a single thread or sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich. I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to my allies, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre." Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great."
Okay, so this is where we go into the covenant of Abram and God.
Yeah.
So this is the blessing that happens before the new blessing. So this is where the order of Melchizedek comes in, of blessing Abram before the covenant that God makes with Abram. So later when we talk about a priest most high, Jesus Christ, from the order of Melchizedek, that is this blessing beforehand and the king before everything else that happens with Abram. So he's already been blessed by somebody who's a higher authority, and now he is going to be blessed with an imputed righteousness just for free by God, which is a secondary. So what Justin, talk about that, because it's a deep subject, and I don't want to chase the whole rabbit for the next 45 minutes because you can't.
No, I think it's interesting. With Melchizedek, he is, I mean, there's a lot of mystery to it. There's a lot of conjecture. Is it Jesus? Is it not? But the whole idea that Abraham paid tithes to him, here's a priest who has no beginning, no end, no offspring that we know of. I would say what stands out to me is that Abraham made a real big point that I don't want second-rate goods from other people, and I don't want them to try to steal from God's glory. And not only that, not only did he not want spoils from wicked people, he wanted to give above and beyond to
Melchizedek the king.
priest of the Most High God. I mean, and in that sense, that just shows you the righteousness of Abraham too. I mean, that
He got it.
he got it, you know, just like we should. I mean,
Okay.
he wasn't all about the vainglory of money and possessions. He was about honoring God. So
Right.
I think that's important.
And from this, we can get a couple things. Sodom and Gomorrah knows about God. We can
From
infer
Sodom.
that because
They got the benefits of
they got the
God.
benefits of it, and that whether or not they believe it's the Most High God or if it's the most powerful God, this is the God that has this guy who came and was able to take on these armies with 318 guys, and he saved us, so we don't want to mess with him. So even though you have a town of rapist men, they have a little bit of
Accountability.
yeah, we don't want to mess with this guy's nephew too much. You know, we do want to just take his guests and rape them, but we don't want to mess with him very much, because Abram, yeah, he's a serious dude, and we should remember that. So that's why Lot can still live there. Should he be living there? No.
There was fear of God, but only to a point.
Right.
And then with their sin of pride and complacency getting so out of hand, I mean, you get prideful enough, God doesn't matter to you. I mean,
Yeah.
might as well do whatever you feel like. And
Yeah.
That's
And-
a danger for anyone. But
And with prisoners, one of the guys had told me that with prisoners it's weird because you have superstitions where they don't believe in God at all, but they believe in the superstitions of, well, if there is a God, I'm not going to mess with you. But if you take me off enough, I'll forget about that kind of thing. You know, well, he's a priest. We're not going to, a preacher. We're not going to attack a preacher. But I will attack a preacher if he takes me off to a certain level. But I'm not going to risk it just to get in his face and show reputation. And then you don't really show reputation because then, you know, well, I know he's a preacher, so we should treat him better. You know, it's this weird, it still happens today, that you have this weird, I don't know how true it is or not, and I don't know how protected by God you are or not, and I don't want to be cursed, you know. And it's like the line you hear when people come into a church and they say, well, I couldn't go in that church, I'll get struck by lightning, you know, kind of thing. It's like, okay, where does that come from? You know, it's just floating out there in the world, and Satan's lies allow those kind of things to permeate, which is kind of good for some of our preachers. If you think about it, there's some places that this preacher can go because there is a superstitious belief rather than a real religious belief that he's protected by God, and that allows him to start that conversation. But, you know, as the world gets darker and darker, there's...
the fringes will become further out. And it's just weird that some people have a form of godliness but deny its power. I mean, it's just very clear.
Yeah. God's been around and you don't get it. You don't hear it.
You want to talk directly with certain people about the Lord, and they're like, oh, that's nice. That's good for you. That's good.
Yeah. Shut it down. Shut it
But
down.
I'm like, he's there for me on my good days. He's there for me on my bad days. He's, you know, he gives and takes away. You know, naked I came to the womb, naked I'll return. But you know what? I have forgiveness of my sins. I have grace when I don't deserve it. I have mercy that says,
Yeah.
you deserve this, but I'm not going to give it to you. I mean, it's just that, you know, we're children of the Most High King. We have an inheritance, and I think Abraham was looking to that city whose builder and maker was God, and not made with human hands, and so he realized he was just a sojourner. He's like, I don't need your iPads, and I don't need your fancy bank accounts and all that. He's like, God's taking care of everything.
Right. Yeah.
Just simplifies life.
And I've seen some things about the simplified pastors who do the construction jobs. You know, they basically retire from a desk job somewhere and say, you know, I'm going to do kind of a construction job, move concrete bags from here to there while I'm there, tell people about Christ, and live at my means where I don't need to live anything higher, and just preach for the rest of my life. Not my thing. I like my iPads and my TVs too much, but you know,
They don't possess you.
right? And you gotta have that balance. And you know, the guy I was talking about he got that idea from another guy who told him he started an ice cream shop just about. He had enough money to start an ice cream shop and just sell ice cream. And just wanted to preach to people selling ice cream. I mean, God called me to sell ice cream and preach. Hey, that's awesome. You're going to sit somewhere and share the Lord with people selling ice cream. That'll be fun. On that note, what we were just talking about with people on the fringes, this week, we were looking for somebody from Nepal because of a couple interviews falling through and things like that at the station. And I used to deliver pizzas with a large group of Nepalese guys at the Papa John's there. And so 2 weeks ago, when the first earthquake hit, I had messaged one of the guys that I was closest to, and he never responded. And you're asking for people to give interviews and things like that. You never know what response you're going to get, because it's a horrible time, a horrible situation. Sometimes people want to talk, and sometimes they don't. So when that interview fell through, I realized, hey, I should contact him back and see what's going on. And he'd never responded, and he hadn't posted anything. So I decided to text another guy that lives in Florida now, so he wouldn't be able to. And I went to his Facebook page to look and to message him, and it said, the guy that I'd been messaging, rest in peace, will miss you. And he had passed away. And I'm like trying to read the threads and see, did he die in Nepal, or what was happening? Did he go back home? And his parent, I think both of his parents actually had been arrested years ago for being librarians and journalists in Nepal when they were having all the unrest about what you could teach and some of those things. So I knew he was already active in any kind of issues that were going on, so I thought maybe he'd been over there for something like that. And I texted everybody I could that knew those guys, and one of the gals came back and says, no, he had stomach cancer. And then another guy came up and told me that he'd had it for years and had basically not shared it with anybody because he's a tough guy. He was hoping to overcome it, and he's cool, hey, it's nobody else's business. I'm finding this on my own. We'll be all good. And, each their own. But what was the most horrible thing was he found out it was terminal. He went to Nepal to say bye to everybody, and the earthquake happened while he was there. And he didn't get to see anybody or say goodbye to anybody because they were missing or dead. So then he was flown back because they didn't have any medical care there for his terminal death time to come. And he came back and he died here alone. Now, this Friday is the day that he died. But the thing that hit me the most, because I told some people at work, and they're like, that's terrible. Immediately what came to my mind is that statement that people make is, how can you believe in a God that lets things like that happen? How can you? And in my mind, it immediately flips back to, well, he was a Buddhist. God might have been pulling to him to, hey, talk to your friend James, talk to your friend, your time's coming close, you're gonna pass away. Look how horrible these things are. Ask some questions about, hey, how can a God let this happen? Would it be something that would lead him to God? And of course, the people who don't believe in God are on that far end of God's, a God like that. You have a God that would let that happen. That's why I don't believe in God at all. Versus me on the other side going, maybe he got to know who God was through the last few years of cancer, and I didn't even know.
Right.
It's amazing how we think differently in those same situations.
But that type of logic tries to make it out that God is not all powerful, or that God is not good. And God is all powerful and God is good, but sin is in this world, and the curse of sin and death are here.
And what happens from it on this planet is because of us. We've done this to ourselves.
He made it perfect. We messed it up.
We messed it up. And it's a incredibly ironic story of horrific, horrible way to go. And my God makes everything good, or tries to make it good for his benefit. So I am hoping that Mahim got to know who the Lord was over the last few years. I have no clue.
Even if it was in the last moment on the airplane, or in the last week.
Yeah.
All it takes is a prayer of faith and believing.
Yep.
this might be off topic, but what a lot of people don't seem to really understand when horrible things happen and people die, and they start asking why would a loving God allow this to happen? What they don't seem to understand is that everybody dies.
Yeah.
And it's just the manner and the time that is the variable. And, you know, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in anything beyond this life, then all you believe in is this world and this life and the death that's in it.
Yeah.
So how could your God, I'm going to stand up high on my hill and look down my nose at you, how could your God allow this horrible thing to happen? It's like, well, people die every day, bro. You're gonna die.
Yeah, everyone's
I'm
gonna
gonna
die.
die.
We don't know the why.
You know, I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't really know the reason, but you know, it's gonna happen, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly,
But then the argument will be why do people get perpetrated on and all that over and over when God knew that was going to happen? And it's still, just because people are evil doesn't make God bad, I mean, or that he's not capable of smiting them or destroying them. But
And if we go right to just the statements of human rights activists, my God gives you the choice to do whatever you're going to do. And just says,
he's not going to force his
he's
will.
not going to force his will on you to make you do something that he tells you he wants you to do. He has the power and authority to do whatever he wants to do. But he says to you, you know, as a child, well, do you really want to go and climb that tree? It's pretty high. And the consequences are yours. And he lets that happen. And sometimes he doesn't let it happen. I believe that he still performs miracles of timing and grace and effectiveness.
It's like a dad who sees a kid falling from the tree and catches him.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, not that the dad was not loving. Like, I may be washing the dishes and my kid falls out of the rosebud tree or redbud tree or whatever. But
Yeah.
what doesn't mean I was neglectful. It just means he made a choice to
Yeah.
risk his neck.
Yeah. And why do we let them play in a tree? They like to play in a tree. They have a good life. If you locked them in a room that was padded that's not living. That's...
Well, that goes back to kind of, I mean, something we had to learn when we were raising our kids, you know, is to live and learn. It's better for you to have the desire to do something and us not forcing it upon you. You're going to enjoy it more when it's your choice,
Right.
you know, and things like that, you know. It's
Yeah.
just, I think that's what God desires, is the best for us, and that's how it has to occur.
Yeah.
You know, so
you train your kid to not to be afraid to climb the tree, but to mind the branches that he steps on.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, this is a tangent, but it's a tangent that completely goes with what we're talking about here. Lot had a choice where he wanted to live.
He also could have stayed with Abraham and sold off some of his livestock.
It seems like that would have been a pretty sweet life. I mean, live with my rich uncle. He's richer than all of you people.
All of you kings, all of you people everywhere.
He's got a pretty rad army.
Or I can live in this town with these people over here that are pretty horrible.
I think in the New Testament, or maybe it's in the prophets, but it says that the sin of Sodom was their pride. Because the lushness of the valley of Sodom was what made Lot want to go there. And could you imagine living in a perfect environment with perfect plants, perfect vegetation, perfect flowers? That was before God destroyed Sodom, of course, but now it's like a pitch heap, you know,
Yeah.
oil and stuff, or salt. So, but you look at that, that's interesting how God turned that world upside down. It's like you go from utter utopian, euphoria. It's like, that's what drug abuse is too. It's like they just want that. They want everything to feel good. They want instant gratification. And Abraham chose more of a lifestyle of living off a hard land, not taking the easy route, being more of a, and all of his descendants were like shepherds or travelers, and it's not an easy life. It's an abundant life, but it's not
Easy.
an easy life, and so the flesh wants the easy.
I have 3 examples of that are modern day examples that are just, we went to Hawaii, of course. Hawaii's beautiful. The people that are the workers are starving because it's a tourist trap. So they have a beautiful place to live and no money to live there because everything costs an exorbitant amount. And they have to work all those jobs to live in paradise.
And the theft rate and break-in burglary rate is so high.
So high. So it's terrible. Carbondale, Colorado. Beautiful ski, upper
Breckenridge kind of thing. Or
1%ers, and then you have people working 3 jobs who are the local people who have nothing. Yes, they live in the most beautiful ski community. When do they ski? They can't. They're broke. And the third one is, I have a friend who was talking about sending his kid to college and sending him and said some statements about, the odds at Sunset College in Florida are 7-1, 7 girls to every 1 guy, and they're all those Florida girls and bikinis. And I'm like, does that make it so it's got like one of the highest party rates, one of the highest. What
do you worship?
Yeah.
What do you give worth to?
Yeah, your son may like looking at things and partying, but why do you, as his parent, think that's a great idea?
And that's what Sodom was. They had worth toward the flesh.
Right.
And we are, in our country, there's a lot of people fasting and praying for our country right now. But that's the thing, is for years and years and years been the major proponent of all these sinful lifestyles that we are just broadcasting live, streaming across the world. And not us as a church, but there are some trappings in the so-called church, but within the world, the flesh, you feed the flesh, you're going to reap corruption. You feed the spirit, you'll reap eternal life. It's a totally different worldview.
And one of the things that I was doing for my dissertation was working on how now with the internet and an instant community of self-gratification, if you love pictures of squirrel ears, there's a community group out there that will also love pictures of squirrel ears. You can be accepted for whatever you want. There's a large enough group. You put it out there somewhere, you will find other people. So your mom and your dad
and if there isn't one, you start a Facebook page for squirrel ears, and it will be viral within a day.
Right.
Because everybody will do it because it's a cool thing to do.
Yeah. So your friends that tell you, God, you need to get out and just let's go hang out at the lake, or let's go do this, or
You're
let's
more
do that.
concerned with how many views you have.
Right. And you get into this world of acceptance, because the acceptance of 600,000 total strangers who don't hold you accountable and don't say, it's really not that cool of a thing.
It's like exhibitionism. It's like I'd rather be an exhibit than be a meaningful, like have a destiny.
Yes.
I'd rather have my moment of glory and fame and look good for a moment than to actually have integrity and to be a person who is accepted and righteous in the eyes of God because of faith, trusting in Him. That's just.
And there's very much I
have the American dream. Look at me. Look at me.
There's very much a good and bad side to this, because for those people who like things that are odd, that aren't actually odd, they're just, this sophomore in high school is really into Milton, a poet, and I want to study this that no one else is into. 2 million people online, his same age group, love Milton. Well, that's great.
Yep.
You like that. That's a great. Well, let's now twist that and keep slowly, Satanly twisting that to make it so, well, that's his thing, and so it's okay that it's his thing, and it's so, wait, you're more into that than getting good enough grades to get into college right now. Okay, where does this start?
Where does it become idolatry?
Right.
Where does whatever you're seeking take precedent and get in the way of seeking Jesus? Where do we miss the boat? Sodom, it was pleasure. For us as Americans, it could be technology, it could be busyness, it could be what other people think of us rather than what God thinks of us. It could be status quo, it could be how much money is in your bank account, whatever your idol is.
Yeah. And I've told other people, and I've told this group, my biggest thing is I don't sleep, and I watch way too much movies and television, and I watch way more than people know. Even after I tell them, they're like, well, I mean, we went over it together at one time. Kurt and I were talking about it,
You should see his chart. It's
terrifying.
frightening.
Yeah, chart. So what's interesting about that is knowing it.
You have to for work sometimes, though, right?
That too. That's the thing is, I got to a point where I was watching things for work and keeping up with things for work, that this was kind of a job, and then I had what I had for my downtime pleasure. Well, they didn't match up at some points. So then I'm spending extra time to do this thing that's worthless or of no value to actually my main parts of life, even though I'm not sleeping already. What do I do with this time? Well, I should probably be doing my Bible study. I should probably be doing, there's other things, but there's a point where it's like, okay, there's just too much. It's just too much. God's not going to like that. God's not going to bless that. And if you look at it from the front side, the what's the way to say it? If you tell other people and they go, whoa, obviously it's too far. But at the same time, when you're talking to somebody who's a magician and he owns 16 guitars,
There's a balance.
There's a balance that you do.
I think Abraham had a balance that he had 1 foot on earth, but 1 foot almost in heaven, in the sense of, I don't need your junk. I'm about to be out of this place. But
Yeah.
he still had years and years to live. But his idea was, I'll fight your battle, Lot. You can get whatever land you want, Lot. You can stay. I mean, I'm sure he was thinking, you could stay with me, Lot. But it was more so our livestock are multiplying and our shepherds are disputing with each other of whose land is what. Well, it's probably because you got some Canaanite shepherds.
Yeah.
Why are you hiring out your work? Why don't you just, we've got more than we need. Let's give away to the poor. And then, all this was way before Moses' laws and all that. And yet there was already a precedent for needing to walk by faith and clarity that people's flesh were getting in the way almost every time. So,
and with the parenting example again, God's watching, going, it's just like me walking into my kid's bedroom and seeing that they've collected some fad that's out right now, and they're spending their money and their time on that fad as much, and going, okay. And there's a point where you go, it's now getting out of control. I want to help you understand that this is kind of silly that you're getting to that point. And God goes, Abram, you can do what you want. And Abram's like, I'm going to do the right thing.
I'm going to.
Yeah, and maybe not. Oh, and I'm going to do the right thing, and maybe not. And it's the same thing as what we do with our own children, which is why it's so great to just think of God as the Father. He's trying to help. Yeah, no. Oh, that's neat that you're into that. Yeah. It's not really that important, but I think that's still neat. God still gives you that. And especially if you turn it back to God.
It's so nice when your kids come up to you and they're like, Daddy, I love you so much. What can I do for you? And it's like, okay. And about 2 minutes later, I hate my brother. I love you.
Yeah.
Never be friends with my brother again. It's like, okay. I like that 1 minute I had.
And thank goodness God is more patient with us than we are with our kids sometimes. All right, so let's keep reading down through. Let's get through Genesis 19. We'll let Haas read for a little while.
19?
Genesis 19 and at verse
10.
12. It's Genesis 19, verse 12.
The two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons, or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against his people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his son-in-laws thought he was joking.
Okay, so wait. Were the sons-in-laws part of the group that came to rape everybody? Yes.
Never
So-
thought of it that way, yeah.
So here's one of those moments that has to do with what we were talking about earlier about how God is and how God gave Lot the ability to save the people that he counted as his people. Lot went to those people and they were like, nah, you're kidding. I'm not listening to you. Do you think he was convincing?
Oh, I bet you he pulled out all the stops.
I assume that. It doesn't really give us that, but I would assume that he was trying to save these people, and they didn't listen. So again, how can you believe in a God that God gave these people chances?
They crawl over the dead body of Lot practically. They almost killed him in the sense
We
of,
get this sort of like, I don't know, like, oh, if you watch like the animated Jesus movies and stuff like that, you know, you get a really sort of watered down, non-realistic version, and it's like Lot walks out and it's like,
Yeah, he's
And they're
like a
like-
puppety mind.
and then he walks away and is like, you don't really get the realism of what happens. Like, you know, when an entire city comes to the door of one man's house to
Violently.
rape the people in there, you know, you sort of get this picture. It's like there's this monolithic singular voice being like, bring him out, we're gonna rape him. And you know, it's like, that's not really how it happens.
It was
There's
like a lynch
shouting and torches and pitchforks and you know.
Prince of Egypt was a good example of a good way to actually depict it, when Moses was basically crying to his former brother, who's now Pharaoh, crying to him, let my people go. And I think that really shows, one, they had a relationship that we don't always think about. And so he was pleading, he knew what was going to happen in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And just after time, is just let my people go or this is going to keep going. And we kept saying no. It's like, I can't do this anymore. God's going to have his way.
Yeah.
So it's like he gave him plenty of chances before he hardened his heart and just said, all right, no, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And what I love about it is I love that movie for all those points, and I hate that movie because they made Moses into an accidental tripper killer instead of a murderer. Somebody said to me one time, well, they didn't want to turn the hero into a murderer, and they didn't want to show those horrible things. They show the kids dying to the sword, they show all the other things,
Beat him to the alligators.
but
They
Moses
twisted.
tripped and they twisted it slightly. Why did you give in on that one thing
because they're not godly.
and not quite
In
God?
the sense, it's
He didn't. It wasn't Moses beating somebody to death. It was Moses accidentally trips and knocks a guy over and he dies.
Like, didn't he beat him to death with a rock?
It was a.
doesn't.
Was it a rod? I thought it said a rod, didn't it? But maybe not. It says he beat him to death.
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I thought this Moses rose up against Moses
Kills the
rose up
Egyptian.
or something. Yeah, I can't remember how he killed an Egyptian that was beating Israelites.
That's probably why I crossed the two because he's beating.
He looked
some-
this way and that way. When he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. It's
Yeah.
Exodus 2,
So
Killed him, but
2,
yeah, he
12.
killed him. So it's murder.
So it's, but it's conjecture. I mean, we don't know how he did.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have gotten like a laser gun.
Yeah.
And it's first degree murder.
He turned into sand and he mixed them up with the sand.
The other thing is like, how do you explain to your kids? Yeah, there's some raving, homosexual, arrogant, prideful, murderous riotous people that came and tried to beat down the door. I'd rather explain it to them that way than have somebody misconstrue, and that's why it's probably not in a lot of animated films. Is like, this is for parents to explain to their kids, but
Yeah.
Well, my point is that, you know, it's like that's kind of the picture that we carry on. Like this.
how graphic.
Genesis is what, 30 or 40 chapters long, 46 chapters long, and it contains the entire history of the world for thousands of years. You know, it's like 46 chapters, thousands of years.
One verse.
It's not a very detailed account.
Description,
Yeah, you know, so it's like, and they came to the door and they were going to rape him, and Lot said no, and you know, you don't really,
Yeah.
unless you sit and really marinate on it, you don't
But he offered
really
his
put it in a
daughter, yeah.
realistic, like put yourself in the moment. You don't really think about how people are.
Right.
You don't really think about what people do, and you know, it's like Lot's pleading, and these people are like grabbing him and slamming him against the door.
That kind of puts
You
puts
know.
it in perspective when my wife's like, why would he offer his daughters? I'm like, that's a good point, but if he's getting slammed up against the door, please take my daughters, but don't touch them, because
Yeah, yeah.
it's such a
They're about to
reputation.
tear him apart. You know.
But it was such a reputation thing that you be hospitable and don't let anything happen to your guests.
Yeah, and if we come, one of the DVD series that we went through was one about being the male that you're supposed to be. You know, it was part of the lessons there was, why do you have cutesy kitty posters that actually aren't what Jesus was like? Why do you have things on the walls that you paid money for that aren't necessary? Why are you it's interesting because as we want to turn it into a nice place. We want to make things nicer. We want to make Jesus nicer than Jesus is the nicest thing ever already. And he got angry, and he was a person, and it's the extra on top. Why do you have to turn him into the I always talk like this thou and sweet all the time in every voice that I'm in? And we make posters and we put them on the walls,
and rainbows and lambs
and everything that we put him into, we have him talk in that way, and then we pass that on to our children. And because we're being Sunday school teachers to pass those on to children, we turn it into those things as well. And we shouldn't do that. We should pick and choose what we're going to show them and how we're going to show it to them. And like you said, the parents have the ability to show them the deeper, harsher things. But are the parents even getting that message? Because we've turned it into a softer, easier thing to say.
More palatable.
More palatable in a modern day. With things like, I mean, if you look at this room,
Sanitizing Jesus, basically.
Well, you don't
Sorry.
you don't stand before a
sanitize Jesus.
preschool, a preschool Sunday school and go into detail about an angry city mob about to commit homosexual rape.
yes,
You
it's
know,
not a
you're gonna
common
save-
thing you teach about.
Save that for the third grade.
But
Wow.
when I do read in the book of Acts with my kids, every couple nights we'll read a chapter. Whenever there's a mob, or because it's like Paul, this chapter, a mob yelling at him. 2 chapters later, a mob yelling at him, and on and on. It's like I'll try to put the voices in the characters, and then I'll be like, okay, guys, yell, and
Yeah,
but
to
even
give them
if
a
give them a
feel.
little bit of a scope. I mean, they can use their imagination, but
Well-
we should be using our imaginations too, our sanctified imaginations.
I mentioned it to this group at one point, and I saw 2 people, and it wasn't just the guys that were in here, there's some other guys. I saw 2 people have that realization about Jewish law still had people being stoned to death all the time. Yes, it talks about that. It happens to Paul all the time. But no, wait. Jesus was part of the Jews. Rabbis were regularly having people stoned to death. So Jesus is walking down roadways where some other rabbi had walked that road that same day, and someone had been stoned to death and was laying dead on roadways. I mean, it doesn't say that anywhere. But
It's
we
within
can.
the realm of possibility.
It's inferred that all the Jewish customs and laws were still going on everywhere.
They didn't have the authority to death sentence though during Jesus'
Jesus,
time.
right, because
that
the
wasn't
Romans.
abnormal to them either. There's no reason to
They
mention
would have
it.
liked to have. That's why they had his trial in the middle of the night.
Right.
Right.
But seeing the dead people on the road, reason it probably wouldn't be mentioned in the Bible is that's a normal thing.
Yeah.
That's not something that somebody turned water into wine. No, somebody's just dead on the side of the road. They probably deserve it.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
but they also did make a public example of people, like you look at Korah's rebellion and all the things during the time in the wilderness. But on top of that, like they brought it out into public so people saw what was going on. Like with the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were standing there with the stones.
Where's
ready
the
to go.
guy? Where's the guy?
Yeah. And if we think about that and we step back and we say a group of adult male church-going guys who knew that Paul was regularly, being thrown stones at, and having just 2 of them have that realization of, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that Jesus was around when that was? Does that mean that these other guys were around when? No, I think Jesus would have stopped it like he did the one we saw him stop.
Right. And
But he wasn't stopping everyone in the world, everywhere that the Jewish law was, from doing anything that had to do with killing people.
But I think the Romans did.
Yeah.
I think historically they lost that power to be able to commit the death sentence, and that's why they took him before Pilate and said, our laws, or we're not allowed to.
Right, right. So there's a lot to be said for how much inside the law the Jews were being at the same time, inside the Roman law.
They were being unlawful in how they were trying to carry out the law. And
Yeah.
he's like, where are all your condemners? Because they're just as guilty. Like, that's what Jesus is saying. It's about the intent of the heart. And
Yep.
you looked at that prostitute the other day, you're just as guilty, you know?
Yeah. And if you forget that for 1,000 years or 2,000 years before that, the Jewish law was Jewish law before the Romans came along. Wait a minute, that's our God that says this is the law, allows this to be happening. Wait, no. God is a God of carrying sheep over his shoulders and just being sweet all the time.
There's children gathered around his ankles and listening to him tell stories, and there's a rainbow behind him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we don't want to water down any of this that we're reading because of those reasons.
It makes for good art, but not practical
Teaching.
living either.
Yes.
Well, that's not what life is.
And when people say that this book doesn't have this doesn't have any life application, are you kidding? It's a Jerry Springer marathon. This is exactly what people are like today, in the same way and doing the same things.
Death and pain and evil and horrible things and betrayal and
There's
sadness.
suspense.
And
It's
all.
very
Talk
good.
about David now.
Yeah.
It's everywhere, man. It's all throughout the book. Beginning to end, it is terrible, terrible stories about horrible people. You know?
So we got one verse farther in Genesis, which was awesome because we got back into together Genesis in the order of Melchizedek starting.
So this is from Galatians, though, right?
This is from Galatians. Yeah.
Like
and,
chapter 3?
And chapter 4.
4, okay.
Because it was, do you not know the law? And the next thing that we read after we read this is the parts in 4 where he points out Sarah and Hagar, the things that we've already read.
The Old Covenant.
Because you have to know what they are in fullness before you get the abbreviated Cliff Notes version that he does in Galatians. I said, well, he's asking us, do we know the law and where it started? Let's go see where it started and the covenant started as well. So let me turn this off.